So often you'll have something pop up. You might have to accept that recording. And I'm just going to share my screen. All right. So Ken, can you just nod if you can see that screen share now? Wonderful. Fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to present today why research endometriosis. And QENDO is presenting this. I did not know they had those fun flashes in there. I feel like I'm back in school with my PowerPoint. And we're doing this in conjunction with the team at the Institute for Molecular Bioscience. And the goal of the team, or of the Institute there, is to create a better future by making breakthrough discoveries to improve health and well-being. So joined with me today, I have Dr. Sally Mortlock, Dr. Brett McKinnon, and Isabel McGrath. If you wanted to give a little wave there. Wonderful. And I'll do a little bit more of an introduction before we have our Q&A and we get to ask them some questions. But what I guess from my point of view that I'm so excited about that we partner with IMB is because they do have the values and attitude around inspiring Queensland's new generation to get involved with exciting research and knowing that that helps make a difference in the future. And we certainly know here at QENDO how important that this research can make to the future of people with endometriosis. So IMB is leading the global race to understand the cause of endometriosis, and they've made significant progress in understanding how the genetic risk factors increase the risk of the disease. And Professor Grant Montgomery has worked for over 25 years to understand what endometriosis is, the genetic makeup, and how it grows and interacts with the body. And so that is why here at QENDO, we believe this research is fundamental, and we advocate, raise funds, and lobby for the work that the team does, and also try and present informational events like this one here. So that we can all learn together. So next Wednesday on the 19th, UQ are having a giving day. And so this is for them to help ease the burden of endometriosis. And I've put up here some of the amounts that, if donated, exactly what they're able to help the research team with. So if $50 is donated, this covers the lab equipment needed to collect data from each patient. $100 supports a research nurse to recruit a patient for the study. $500 supports the analysis of a patient's clinical and genetic data, and then $1,000 supports the sequencing of genetic risk factors in 4 patients. So you can scan or hold your phones up or copy that QR code now. It will come up again at the end of the presentation, but this is such an important part of supporting the research that the team does there. And I love that we're able to see exactly what that goes to. So I should also tell you a bit about QENDO. We are Australia's longest running endometriosis charity. We turn 35 next year. And we support anybody that is affected by endometriosis, adenomyosis, PCOS, pelvic pain, and infertility. And we have over 70 volunteers all across Australia, and we work closely with government, with health departments, researchers, and also the community to provide awareness, education, and support. And we were instrumental in helping to develop the National Action Plan for Endometriosis. And this is something that is also what other countries around the world look to Australia for, because we were one of the first to be able to implement a plan like this for endometriosis. So the 3 priorities for the National Action Plan for Endometriosis, or NAPE, are awareness and education, clinical management and care, and research. And that is why it's so important that we support the research that is being done by the Institute, but also that we're able to help bring these events to raise awareness for what they're doing and for them to learn also from the community. And it can be that sort of consumer collaboration. So some of the services that QENDO offer, we have free membership, and we do a lot of peer-based support. So we have local community groups where you can go and meet other people with endometriosis, or families and partners of people with endometriosis from a social point of view. But we also do a lot of peer support. So we have a free hotline and a mentor program where people can connect directly with a peer who has endometriosis and can help lead them to educational resources that we have to support them and their mental health and their families on these journeys, and to learn about how extensive this disease is. In line with NAPE, we also developed the QENDO app, and you're able to download this for free. And this was developed by the community for the community. But I've had lots of people who have conditions outside of endo, adeno, and PCOS use this as well. So it's a really handy app in general. You can track your pain, bleeding, and GI symptoms, but you can also track exercise and food and make your own labels for tracking. So you can track maybe longer days at work, you can track when you're more stressed, maybe, you know, when you're standing or sitting for certain amounts of time, when you have sex, you can track all these different things. And then you're able to generate reports, and you can keep those with yourself or share them with a health professional. And this can help sometimes to understand more about your condition and to track and see different correlations. And that then allows people to develop a pain plan to manage when we have flares. So I have told you a lot about QENDO and what we do, but if you've joined us and you don't know a lot about endometriosis itself, I wanted to do a bit of an introduction. So 1 in 9 women in Australia have endometriosis. And it's important that when we talk about this, we understand that this figure comes from research that was done exclusively with women. But we know in the community that there are people who are intersex, trans, and non-binary that do have an experience endometriosis. So it's really important that we include everybody in these conversations. Even if some of the research we have was not conducted with everybody in mind, it's important that when we talk about the 1 in 9 women, that's from a statistic point of view, but we understand that this affects people of all diversity. So endometriosis is a condition where tissue that is similar to the lining of the uterus grows in other parts of the body. So it's normally in the pelvis, but it can be found in every single organ. And we have an average diagnosis time of between 6 and 10 years. That is an incredibly long time. I believe in Australia it is 7 is our average, and there's no known cause or cure for endometriosis. There are some things we do know, like the probability increasing when you have a first-degree relative with endometriosis. And you would have noticed before that I put an emphasis on that similar, that the tissue is similar. And the reason why this is so important is that endometriosis lesions are not the endometrium. So it's not a period disease. It is a hormone-dependent inflammatory illness. So it affects the entire body. The lesions respond to circulating estrogen, and they also produce their own estradiol, and that results in inflammation, which is why we need to remember when we're talking about this, or if you're hearing about this out in the world, if you're hearing about it framed as a menstrual disease, that is not correct. It certainly can affect and create painful periods, but it is one that affects the whole body. Adhesions may also be present in the pelvis from those lesions, and then also from previous surgeries, including surgeries for endometriosis. And this can then lead to pelvic organs being adhered to one another or affecting the mobility of those organs. So as you can imagine, that is then quite a great amount of pain. So those lesions can present in a variety of ways. They can be clear, yellow, translucent, they can be superficial or deep infiltrating, or an ovarian endometrioma. And while there are several theories that exist that attempt to explain endometriosis, none of those have significant outcomes to prove the theory. And as I mentioned, those lesions present in such a variety of ways. Where they are in the body, what kind of lesions, what they look like, the site, how much of them are in the body, none of these things correlate with the frequency or the severity of the symptoms. So that makes it really difficult, not only for those with endometriosis, but then for the research as well. There are several symptoms with endometriosis. A lot of those are revolving around pain, and that is certainly one of the things that people talk about being the most difficult for them. So that can be pain during or after bowel motions, lower back pain, ovulation pain, pelvic pain, and then pain when engaging in intercourse or masturbation or with orgasms. There's also symptoms of heavy bleeding, fatigue, brain fog, nausea, IBS. This is not an exhaustive list. And one of the most important things that I believe that you can know for when you go out into the world and you maybe meet either someone that you know has endo or maybe you don't know yet, is that everybody's experience is different. Some people have severe pain and others have literally no pain at all. Symptoms can change from person to person, but also across your cycle, but also across your life. And so everyone has a really different experience with endometriosis. And that is such an important thing to factor in when we're talking about it, so we can understand the effects individually on people. We know that there is a greater psychological impact in the form of depression and anxiety for those people who have endometriosis and are symptomatic. But it has a psychological impact on everybody. And that's because this condition affects relationships. So relationships with an endo warrior to their own work or their career, relationships with their employers, family and friends and partners. And this can severely impact the quality of somebody's life. There are a lot of experiences of trauma that come with endometriosis. For some people, that is from that long diagnosis time, 6 to 10 years of maybe, not knowing what is going on inside of their body. It can be from the experiences they have in the medical world. It can be from the burden of being in pain and unable to escape that pain from our bodies. And we also are starting to learn about the impact of endometriosis on women's body image. There was a great research paper done last year about that here in Australia, and also learning about how this might also sort of intersect with disordered eating and self-harm. So this is a really, overall, the psychological and social impact for people is a really important part of the picture to talk about when we're talking about endometriosis. So I have given you a lot of information, and like I said, if you are new to endometriosis, this is a fun one to screenshot. So you've got everything, nice facts and myths here on the screen. But what I'd love you to remember is that endometriosis is not a period disease. Remembering there is no current cure. So that means that pregnancy cannot cure endo. It means that a hysterectomy cannot cure endo. And although it may assist some people in symptom management, the pill will not shrink or cure endo. A really heartbreaking myth out there for many families and women with endometriosis is that if you have endo that you cannot have children, and this is not true. While it can cause subfertility and infertility, it's not an absolute. Not everyone with endo will experience these problems. And this is not about endometriosis, but this is a really important myth for absolutely everybody. But it's not normal for periods to be extremely painful. And this is something that societally that we often, are told and believe. And this can be what makes it so difficult for the person with endometriosis sometimes, because if we have that myth out there that endo is a period disease, we believe that it's okay for periods to be extremely painful, then that can lead a lot of people to feeling dismissed and also to try and manage their pain without seeking help. So it's important for you to know that periods which cause disruption to your day-to-day activities. So if you're calling in sick to school or work or uni, you can't go play sports or hang out with your friends. If you can't manage with paracetamol or ibuprofen or a heat pack, then this warrants further investigations. To say thank you for everyone that is joining today to this event, QENDO would like to offer free shipping for the rest of the month, so to the 31st of October on our website. And we have, we have symptom management tools, so heat packs and TENS machines. We've got educational tools, we've got books, and then we've also got some fun merch as well. So you can use that pelvic pain code to get free shipping. And we'd also like to extend a huge thank you from our hearts to the Institute for Molecular Bioscience and particularly Professor Grant Montgomery. We really believe in the work that the team is doing, and that they want to hear from the community really speaks volumes to the passion and the love that they put into this work. So from QENDO, thank you. If you have any questions about the work that QENDO does, about endometriosis, or if you'd like a similar training session like this for your workplace or business, you can email training@quendo.org.au. And I would just like to introduce now the team over at IMB. So I'm just going to pause the share for a moment because it's a bit difficult for me to see with my PowerPoint and everything all at once. So, all right, so we've got, and I might get you to give a little wave. We've got Dr. Sally Mortlock. So Dr. Sally Mortlock is a lead computational biologist within the genomics of reproduction disorders group at the Institute for Molecular Bioscience, so at IMB. And over the past 5 years, she has led analysis of the largest molecular data sets for the endometrium for both Australian and international endometriosis cohorts. Her studies have expanded knowledge of the genetic regulation in endometrium, generating important data resources to identify gene targets regulating female reproduction. So I'm going to also introduce the other researchers we have here, but maybe also you could all introduce yourselves so that we can understand some of that language might be things that we're not quite used to. But first I'll introduce Dr. Brett Kinnan. He's a cell biologist with 15 years of experience in endometriosis research. He holds a dual position at the University of Queensland and at the Hospital in Bern. I'm not sure if I've got that right there, sorry. In Switzerland, and is a founding member of the Australian Interdisciplinary Researchers in Endometriosis, and leads the Endo Research Queensland study in collaboration with the Department of Gynecology at the Royal Brisbane Women's Health. His research focuses on the pathogenesis and treatment of endometriosis through the recapitulation and study of endometrial tissue in the laboratory. And finally, we've got Isabel McGrath. Isabel is a second-year PhD student working on the genetics of endometriosis in the genomics. I'll probably stumble every time on that one, of reproductive disorders group at IMB. Her research is focused on disentangling the heterogeneity of endometriosis, why the symptoms and disease features of endometriosis vary substantially between individuals. So I'm going to leave that giving code up on the screen, and I'm going to turn over to our research team now to tell us a little bit in their own words as well, what they do at IMB.
Yes, so thanks, Amanda, and thank you for a lovely introduction as well. So as Amanda mentioned, I'm Sally. So that kind of, my bio there was a complicated way of saying that I analyze a lot of data in our group. So as opposed to the traditional kind of white lab coat that you might be used to associating with research, I'm more behind the computer. So it's my role in the group to analyze a lot of the genetic data that we get in, and a lot of the data that we produce in the lab and that we collect from patients. So a lot of the projects that I work on focus on looking at the genetic risk factors for endometriosis. So we work with a number of groups nationally and internationally in order to identify regions of the genome that increase risk of endometriosis. And then we follow those up to see what genes are in those regions and how they might be contributing to the disease. A new part, I guess, of our research where we're moving on with this is to be able to use that knowledge of what roles these genes are playing, and also any associations we see with particular symptoms or patterns in symptoms to kind of aid the diagnosis of endometriosis. So that's kind of one focus of our research, being trying to improve those diagnostic pathways. We also look a lot at looking at what, as kind of in terms of what Isabel's working on, which she can talk more about. We also look a lot about the differences that we see between individuals, and the heterogeneity that we see in the disease. But I'll leave it to her to explain a bit more about what she does and her role.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It's a wonderful description and amazing work that you're doing.
Okay, next. So as you mentioned, Amanda, so my focus of my PhD project is on the heterogeneity of endometriosis. So every individual with endo has a different kind of presentation, different symptoms, different lesion locations. So I'm just trying to work out kind of what causes that heterogeneity and also the different types of heterogeneity. And so far I've been working on the comorbidities of endometriosis. So other conditions that people with endo seem to be at an increased risk of having. So I've been working on identifying those disorders or conditions, and then also working out whether they're a risk factor for endometriosis, or whether they're an outcome of endometriosis or neither. And this is particularly important because we don't have many disease predictive factors for endo. So I hope that my work is going to allow us to find more of those. And then in terms of the outcomes, it's important for people with endo to know what conditions they might be more liable to, so that they can be a bit more aware of this and undergo a bit more screening in the future. And then, from a biologicals perspective, it's also really interesting to try and find the biological pathways that overlap endometriosis and these other conditions. And my hope is that by doing that, we'll be able to gain a bit more insight into how endo actually develops.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
And so just to follow on, so thanks, Sally and Isabel. So as opposed to what Sally and Isabel work on, I work on a little bit different. We do a lot of the cell biology here at IMB, and that kind of complements the work that Sally and Isabel are looking at. So we know that the genetics are going to have a role in endometriosis, but we really need to understand what that role is going to be and how they influence that. And we do that by trying to make models or examples of the cells and the tissue that's involved in endometriosis in the lab. So when we can build them in the lab, we can study them in a defined environment, and we can manipulate them to understand what maybe different genetics might influence, how they could influence it, and what different sorts of treatments or other interventions might be able to help with the disease. So what we really do in the lab is to try and build up from very basic models of taking it to the very basic, the individual cells, and then build them up to try and make them as complex as we can to recapitulate what the endometrium and what the endometriotic lesions would look like in the real in vivo environment. And we can really integrate a lot of the genetics work we do with that to sort of bring the whole program together.
Wonderful, thank you. I think when I'm listening to you, one of the things that maybe surprises me, because this is not my world, I'm not a researcher, is that it sounds like you are all working on such different parts of this condition, which is so important because there is so many things that make it up. So really interesting to see how you're each doing something a little bit different. I'd love to hear personally what drew you to this research. Was it the University of Queensland itself? Was it endometriosis? Was it the work that was being doing there? I'd love to hear why you're so passionate about it. I know why we here at QENDO are, but what about yourselves?
So I know for me personally, I started my research career actually studying animal and veterinary science. So I started by looking at genetic risk factors for cancer in different dog breeds. So I kind of developed a real passion for genetics during my earlier studies in animals. And when I finished my PhD, I wanted to translate that into another area. Endometriosis was an opportunity that came up here for me. I'm originally from Sydney. The opportunity came up here at the IMB. I've actually got a history of endometriosis in my family. So my mum, my grandmother, and my auntie have all suffered from endometriosis. So I kind of had that experience of seeing their difficult journeys. And so when the opportunity came up to actually apply the skills and what I was really interested in to a disease that had had such a huge impact on our family personally, it was a really great opportunity to take up here at IMB, surrounded by a lot of great minds up here as well.
Thank you for sharing something so personal, and I think it is what is so important about events like this today is, sometimes I think when you're reading research, you forget about the people behind that, and that they have their own stories and sort of journeys that have led them to want to research this, and that sometimes it's curiosity, but sometimes it is that experience in the family as well, which as endo warriors we know can be really impactful. Isabella, were you happy to share how you came to this research?
Yeah, absolutely. So my interest in endogenetics kind of started with an interest in genetics. So when I first found out what a gene was in high school biology classes, I just knew that was the kind of career path for me. And then I didn't actually know about endometriosis as a condition until during my undergraduate degree, where I found out about this research group. And I was so surprised that I'd never heard of it, given this extremely high prevalence. And that kind of inspired me to learn a bit more about the disease. And then when I was learning about it, I found that there wasn't actually that much to learn because we still don't know so much. And that gave me a lot of kind of ideas of what I'd like to find out. And yeah, this research group is, leading the world in endo research. So I knew this would be a great opportunity for me to kind of use my knowledge of genetics to add to this knowledge. Yeah.
I love that that we didn't know much about it, that inspired curiosity in you to go, yeah, I want to learn more and contribute to that, because I think for a lot of people with endometriosis, we find that really difficult to first come across it, and it can be a bit of a stumbling block. So we need those people that go, oh, why is that? So I'm really curious, and then to get into the whys of that. So that's amazing. Brett, are you happy to share as well?
Yeah, sure. So actually, it's not that different to Isabel, to be honest. So when I finished my PhD and was looking for a postdoc opportunity, and I got an offer for a group that was working on endometriosis at the time. This was quite a few years ago now, I guess. So it wasn't so well known. at that stage, and I actually had never heard of it before. And so, started preparing for the job and looking into it and reading about it, and just was amazed at how prevalent it was, but how little was known about it, and how much space there was to do in the work for that as well. From an intellectual point of view, there's a lot to do. You feel like there's so many different avenues to explore, and so that was a position for 2 years, and I guess I'm still here working on it.
Oh, I love that. And again, I love that attitude of there's so much to do. Instead of being overwhelmed, it's like, I'm going to jump in and learn more about this. I think that's amazing. I just want to remind everybody that is joining us, if you've got a question, you can directly chat that through to me. So you can do that at any time. I've got another one, and so this is just for the team in general, but what impact do you believe your research has on helping the wider community? Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the points you presented earlier make a really good case for the kind of impact that this research has. So I guess in what was outlined in the National Action Plan as well was this real need to improve the diagnostic time and to improve the treatments. And that's kind of what we are working towards in our research. And as you mentioned, it's a very multidisciplinary approach that we're using as well. So we're working towards getting that better understanding of the disease biology in order to translate that into potentially being able to target better treatments or personalized treatments to women to reduce the burden on women. We're looking into risk factors and ways of understanding the variation that we see in the disease so that we can better and more quickly diagnose the disease so that women aren't having that huge delayed period as well. So I guess tackling those two main things are really trying to improve the diagnosis and make that quicker and less invasive, but then also working on understanding that disease biology so that we can better target treatments or better manage the disease in these women.
Yeah. And for anyone joining us that is not aware at the moment, a laparoscopy is the way that we would diagnose endometriosis. So to be able to potentially bypass that, like you said, the impact on people, it would be incredible, and to cut down that 6 to 10 years, which is just such a long time to be on a journey of discovery. I've got some more questions here. What is what are some of the biggest barriers to advancing endometriosis research and making a bigger impact?
That's a really good question. I think one of the barriers that I face in the genetic side is power, in that we need a very large sample size to be able to find things, because there's not one gene or one variant that causes endometriosis.
And I think, just to follow on from what Isabel's saying as well, is it's such a heterogeneous disease that to get power, we need lots and lots of patients, and I think to start separating out what the differences are in the disease, that's the first step. It's very hard to understand what's going to be causing certain types of pain if they're all different types of endometriosis all being combined together. So we really need, to deconvolute all that complexity, and we need power to do that.
Yeah. That leads into another question I've got here. How do you recruit research participants?
So I can take that one. So at the moment, we do have a study that's being conducted at the Royal Brisbane Women's Hospital, and they're recruited via the clinicians via their treatment pathways. So this is very much focused on patients that are coming through for surgery. There are also a lot of other studies going on around Australia that are interested in just patients providing information, answering questionnaires, providing details as well. And I believe there are places that they could go to find where those studies are being performed.
Yes, yeah, we have a link on our website, so quendo.org.au, where we often share those sort of call outs for participants, for, like I said, all the different kinds of studies. Some of them might be they'd like to see scans, some might be where you're interacting in the study, but sometimes it is just information too. So as an undergraduate who is interested in endometriosis research, what tips would you give to someone who wants to break into this research area?
I would suggest finding good researchers to work with would be one of
Yes.
the first things I would suggest. If you work with good researchers, you're going to be able to look further into the disease and look into it the right way. And I think that's a big step.
Yeah, and in extending that as well, I mean, we get approached as well by students studying their undergraduate degree. So even recently, I've been approached by a couple of students that have got a real interest in the topic. And I mean, we're always wanting to increase our research capacity, and there are so many questions we've still got to answer. So we're always keen to take on new students as well. So even just approaching us or others in the field, if you've got an interest in this area, there are normally a lot of opportunities, either through volunteering through kind of summer projects and things, through to doing maybe more structured like masters or PhD kind of projects. But there is that ability then, and we're actively trying to increase the research capacity and bring in the next generation of endo researchers so we can make sure we get through our long list of questions.
Yeah, wonderful. We've got a question here from someone who's asking, is there a way that we as the public can access and read your current research?
Yes, so we have a website that's connected through the IMB, the Institute for Molecular Bioscience website. We have a page there, the Genomics of Reproductive Disorders group, and that provides a lot of links out to, as well as kind of a summary of what our current research is, but also links out to some of the articles where we've published some of our research. A lot of that now is becoming more publicly available. So it used to be kind of restricted access things, but now a lot of that is publicly available. Even through Google and Googling it, you can find a lot of our work now. But probably that our website and that group website is a good place to start, and that can link you out to all the different areas that we're working with and the collaborators we're working with as well.
Wonderful. And that's so great to hear, because I think it is, it's so difficult when you go looking for research and it's behind, you know, maybe a certain sort of journal walls or things like that. So there is, you know, there is so much, and it's really easy to navigate on the UQ website. So I would encourage everyone to have a look at that. I've got a question here. What would you like to see next in endometriosis research?
I guess from my area of work in the genetic side of things, like we've done some really large studies looking for genetic risk factors. The last one we did was in 60,000 women with endometriosis, but in saying that, there was kind of a limited amount of really detailed clinical data on those women. So we knew if they had endo or not, but we didn't know the specifics. And I guess it talks to what we've been saying about how variable the disease is. If we had deeper information on these women and the types of disease and the types of symptoms that they are experiencing, it would allow us to get a lot of finer detail on the potential causes to those specific different kinds of disease. So I guess the thing I would wish for in kind of next steps is bringing in that higher detailed data so that we can better answer these questions and better address the problems.
And I think to add to my experience for that as well is, you know, a few years ago now, there was the National Action Plan to start getting endometriosis research going in the same direction. And I think that is really starting to happen now. And I think we've got some really good groups around Australia that are working on really good research. And if we can start working together and working in the same direction, then, you know, we're going to get further than we will if we all start working individually. But I think that's happening. I think it's a positive, and I think it's something I'd like to see continue as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I would echo that as well. I think it is one of the things that makes these sorts of conversations so exciting, is, you know, different teams working together. So, you know, a research team talking to an organization like QENDO who works so closely with the community, you know, then we can really understand what you're doing and we can champion that to the community. And then as well, you've got that sort of direct understanding of what impact this has. And then, like you said, all of those different people coming together. So it's not, you know, 2 or 3 people working on the same research project. It's really that we're all in this together. And when this is something that we're talking about affecting 1 in 9 Australian women. So that is, you know, for most people, that's somebody that you know, and that is impacting their family and their whole life. So it's so important that we come together. I do have a question here. It's been asked out to everybody, but it is around management of endometriosis. So I'm going to skip that question because we do want to focus on the research today, but please reach out to QENDO. I would love to talk to you about this and we can help you with some resources, but I will sort of go more into some of the research questions. So one here is, has a comparison been done between people in other countries and diets?
It's a good question, and the answer is probably not enough comparisons have been done. So I guess there's been a lot of the current work that's been done has generally been done in big European populations, and it's been a lot harder to get access to and any data on other ethnicities, other cultural backgrounds. And I think that's a changing movement though. So there are projects that are going on that are doing big collections in other ancestral groups in other countries, because there is some evidence just from a genetic point of view that there may be some slight differences in genetic risk factors between different ancestries. We've seen risk factors that are only present in Japanese populations, for example, that are a little bit different in the European population. And there's also a little bit of emerging evidence that there could be some differences in the incidence. But again, there's just a very limited amount of data that's available for those other groups. But it is something that's changing, because I think as a research community, not only in endometriosis, but in a lot of the other diseases out there, it's very much acknowledged that we don't have enough representation from a lot of the other ancestral groups. And that can be a really valuable way to get a lot more information about the variation that we see in the disease as well. So it's something that is developing and ongoing.
Yeah. What do you find maybe as some of the barriers to that representation? Is there things that we can be doing to be more supportive for you know, Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander people here in Australia, LGBTQI+ people? Is there ways that we can you know, understand different people's experiences?
Well, I think the starting point for that is awareness, you know, which is improving and is getting better. But that awareness has to be reached out to all these remote and rural communities as well, and all to other communities we have across Australia. Once we start getting the awareness up, people are more aware that the GPs are more aware the diagnosis can be better. And then the research sort of follows on from that a little bit as well.
Yeah. And what about men? Is it possible for men to get endometriosis?
There has actually been a couple of recorded cases of men with endometriosis, which is obviously very interesting, and really makes us think about different ways that pathogenesis could occur as well. So, you know, that it is possible, and it's, you know, it's fascinating from a scientific point of view.
Yeah, absolutely. Got some more questions here. Is there an ideal genetic model to do in vitro studies of endometriosis?
So I guess that's something that we're working on in terms of creating our models, because I guess the ideal model represents the human population as much as possible and the variation that we see in the human population. But obviously we can't, not like mice in a lab or something, we can't keep huge cohorts of Winnemans to do our experiments with. So that's where a lot of Brett's work comes in, is creating these cell models that includes models of different genetic backgrounds, which are representative of the different genetic backgrounds that we see out in the population, so that we can use those models in the lab to then look at the effects of particular genetic variants or particular treatments and things like that in a model that is kind of just the cell or cellular level, but still represents that genetic background that we see in the wider population.
No, not just to pat ourselves on the back, but I think that's where IMB leads the field in this, because we do have a nice cross section between the people working in the genetics and people working in cell biology, and have the opportunity to bring those together, which isn't happening anywhere else that I know of anyway.
Part of that, again, that collaboration and working together. So somebody has asked, do animals get endo? And if so, do you work with animals with endo?
So we don't do any work with animals. So one of the reasons for that, well, lots of reasons, but most laboratory animals do not get spontaneous endometriosis. They have different reproductive systems. So they don't spontaneously get endometriosis. There is some primates that do spontaneously get endometriosis, but we don't work with those either. So no, we don't do any animal work, because we feel it's more valuable to recapitulate complex in vitro models than using animals for these sort of studies.
Wonderful, thank you. So there's a question here, and like I can share on behalf of QENDO and then ask the researchers as well, but what pathways are here to share and promote this information and research to GPs? So I guess it depends on what sort of information from a research point of view. Is there some pathways that you have to share this, or is that, I know we do a lot of that sort of work with QENDO. Is that work that you would do there at IMB?
I guess from our point of view, a lot of our dissemination of our research goes out through things like research papers and different conferences and symposiums, where it can be a mixture of both researchers and clinicians. So we also work quite closely within our group. We have clinicians that work with us. So I guess it's about, we share the information with them, and we also share it in these educational settings of conferences and papers that are also attended by clinicians. Yeah, I guess that's kind of the main avenues of disseminating our research through them.
Yeah, wonderful. And for QENDO, we will do, so we've got brochures that you can access, that you can, ask your GP to stock, or also we will often do educational sessions. So we work closely with GPs to help them understand and learn about this, and then support their patients. There's a question here from someone: can the endo growth be transferred from one person to another?
Not that we know of, yes.
Wonderful. And then what are some methods that can be implemented to translate this new research and understanding into clinical settings to increase the diagnosis of endometriosis? And I guess, again, that's sort of what you've spoken on just now about how you're able to educate. And then it would be sort of working, that it's, again, one of the priorities for Nate is to sort of, I guess, translate that through to clinical settings. Anything else to add with that one?
Yeah, no, I think that covers it quite well. And just saying that a lot of the projects that we work on are kind of that multidisciplinary team, where it's both researchers and clinicians, so that they can help facilitate that transition of our research into the clinic. So we try and keep that close research collaboration with clinicians to ease that translation into clinic when we're at that stage. Yeah.
And as you've sort of talked about, at the stage we're at now, this is so different individually for everybody. So, it can't necessarily be just one bulk, translation. Sometimes it does come down to individuals, which is why it's so important to continue some of this research. I've got 2 more questions before we wrap up today. So the first is, does endo tissue have its own DNA?
So yes, it does have its own DNA. It's made up of cells. So as every cell in the body kind of has DNA. And yeah, so far with our genetic studies, we generally study someone's DNA in their blood cells because that's a bit easier to extract. But we are moving towards studying the DNA in the actual endometrial lesions as well.
Yeah. So the cells that are carried by the lesions carry the same DNA that's in the rest of the body. But I guess something that Brett could potentially talk to as well is that some of the lesions also carry what we would call somatic mutations, or mutations that aren't in the other cells in the body that could be having a role in that pathogenesis. So that's another aspect of the DNA from the lesions themselves.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that that's a normal mechanism for all cells, that they will acquire mutations as they age. That's just the way natural selection works. But because these cells are growing in a different place than they normally would be, they're now growing to be slightly different to what the endometrium was originally, and which you also talked about a little bit in your presentation, that it's endometriotic lesions are not the endometrium, they are a little different.
Yeah, that's right. So the last thing, I think this is a beautiful question for everybody that's here today. What is one thing that we can take away and do to help you with the research that you do?
Do a couple of things, but I guess one of the things, I guess, is awareness as well. So just the awareness of the disease and the impact that it has, and the research that's going on around it. And I guess another of the big messages from today, as well as a main way of support as well, is participating in our giving day as well, and any contributions to that. But I guess one of the main things being awareness and just sharing that knowledge of endometriosis and the impact it has, to get the word out there of why it's so important to keep looking into this.
I agree, and I think you even said that too in your presentation, that pain's not normal. If you've got pain, go and see someone about it. And that helps raise the awareness.
Absolutely, yeah. If you are able to donate to the University of Queensland on their Giving Day, we've got that QR code up. It should still be on your screen now. So that is one thing that you can do. And if you're not able to make, and that's any amount of donation, but if you're not able to, then sharing their website, sharing QENDO resources to say, here's what we know so far. They're doing amazing work. Getting that awareness out there is a great way you can help today. I want to say such a big thank you to Sally, Brett, and Isabel for joining us today, and for being so open with the questions and answers, and really sharing with us what you're doing and why it's so important to you and to the community as well. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share our research with you all.
So I'd like to finish by handing over to Professor Grant Montgomery.
Thanks, Amanda. And I just also wanted to thank you for your presentation and for moderating this talk, and just how much we value our collaborations with and constant discussions with QENDO, and the support and from you, and also the opportunity to talk with the patients, because that has driven a lot of our approach to the research, and both formally and informally, and it's so important, and we're only going to solve these things by continuing to work with patients, patient groups, clinicians, and the researchers. So it's something we all need to do together. And I just wanted to pick up really on a couple of points that have been discussed. I mean, thank you, Brett and Sally and Isabel, for sharing. And so I was invited to talk to the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists yesterday about our work, and I was kind of reflecting on 25 years of the genetics studies and where we've got to at this point. And really, it has been an area of clinical need and research that's been neglected relative to the impact on the population. And so I think it's important that we kind of strive to get that awareness, that we get more funding into this, and we're working hard at it. But I think that the other really important point is that the technology and our ability to do all these studies has just changed dramatically. And so although we continue to do the discovery end, we're really moving a lot of our work towards translation these days. And we have some sort of strong ideas about where to take this and applying for funding. But the really important thing to me, I think, is working together, but also getting the next generation of researchers into the field to use the new tools that we've got to address what is a difficult challenge for us all, I think. So thanks very much, Amanda, and the team.
Thank you. And I think you're right, getting the next generation excited. And maybe that's something else, if you're listening today, that you can go home and do, is you can talk to, your younger kids or nephews or nieces, people that that might be interested in going to the University of Queensland and engaging in this sort of research by talking about endometriosis. We break down those stigmas, we allow people access to support, and then we can champion amazing researchers like this. So thank you, everybody, for joining today, and enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. Thank you.